Good evening, everybody, and thank you again, councillors. Welcome to our council meeting this evening. May I also extend a warm welcome to members of the public who are watching our webcast and those who are sitting at the back, I think. Yes. I would like to remind members of how I intend to deal with the guillotine this evening if I need to. Under Standing Order 9 of the Council Procedure Rules, I do intend to take a formal comfort break this evening, and I will propose a 10-minute adjournment at an appropriate point during the meeting between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, or seeing how the meeting progresses. Where 3 hours have elapsed after the commencement of the meeting, I shall interrupt the meeting, and the member speaking must immediately cease speaking and sit down. The meeting shall then dispose of the item then under consideration as if the motion that the question be put now had been carried. We will then vote on that and any remaining items by moving on. Item 1, declarations of interest. Members are asked to consider whether you have any disclosable pecuniary or any other relevant interest in connection with any matters to be determined at this meeting, and if so, to declare and state the nature of such interest. Please indicate now if you wish to declare any interests you wish to declare. Please show. No? Okay. 2, Mayor's announcements. I've had 2 apologies. I have received, apologies from councillors Paul Hayes, Tony Cottier, Chris Briggs, Carl Greeny and Emily Greaves. Are there any other apologies?
Mr. Mayor, Andrew Gardner.
Thank you. And Councillor Sharon Jones. Moving forward then, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Orad Asanlu, who was elected to the Oxton ward at the by-election of the 25th of November. Welcome to your first council meeting, Councillor Asanlu. On Tuesday, the Policy and Resources Committee met to consider and respond to the Minister of State's recent letter to the Council. I've been asked by Councillor Williamson and Anderson to accept the minutes of that meeting and an accompanying motion as an urgent item for Council. Given the importance of the Council making clear its position in respect of the recommendations of the External Assurance Review that accompanied the minutes, Minister's letter, I agree this is urgent and the Council should consider this item, which I will take after item 4B. Finally, to assist councillors this evening, a supplementary agenda pack has been published, and I would ask councillors to refer to that pack during consideration of any amendments to motions to be discussed. Item 3, minutes. Turning to item 3, we are asked to approve the minutes of the council meeting held on the 18th of October 2021. I will move approval of these minutes as a correct record. Do I have a seconder? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Public and members' questions. No requests to make any public questions have been made. B, statements. No requests to make a statement have been made. B, 2, petitions. I am aware that Councillor Pat Cleary would like to submit a petition. I now invite Pat Cleary to present the petition. Thank you. Yes, Andrew.
As I mentioned to you earlier on in the evening, I had a petition in support of a request to Wirral Council to remove 3 trees on the Grassberg outside numbers 3 to 4 Daily Close. There's a history of trees falling in and around Strip Daily Close, producing spectacular fall number 5 with volumes that pose a serious and significant risk to life, mineral property. The trees are situated on a sandstone reef, meaning their roots of necessity are shallow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I was just going to say, my mic's now working, but I couldn't hear whether anybody else's mic was working then. So, could you just test your mics over that side of the room?
Sorry, it's because we're sharing. I apologise, I didn't put the mic on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry I didn't give you prior notice of this, but I've only just collected it. But I have a petition to present to full council, and it's signed by 577 residents of Wallasey Ward. And they're requesting action by Wirral Borough Council to improve the road safety on the upper site at St George's Primary School. And council will probably be aware that much work has been done on the lower site, but clearly there needs to be massive improvements for not only the safety of the pupils and the young people, but also the residents. And what is quite fantastic, Mr. Mayor, in my view here, that the petition is actually organised by Isaac, who happens to be a Year 6 pupil. So not only are the young people concerned for their own safety, they're concerned for that of the residents as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further petitions? No? All done? Right. Going to moving to the urgent item of business. I invite Councillors Williamson and Anderson to move their motion as set out in the supplementary agenda pack. Proposer of the motion, Councillor Jeanette Williamson, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't intend to take the 5 minutes, but I do believe this item was of such importance that I was happy to work with my colleagues across the chamber here to present this tonight. We've had a really tough few months as a council off the back of the 2 reports, the 2 assurance review reports that we received. They made for really difficult reading in parts, and I think every councillor sitting in this chamber tonight will recognise some of the criticisms that were levied at us. There's no doubt in my mind that we have to improve how we work as a council, and we have to work together in order to achieve that aim. One of the reports, particularly the one by Ada Burns, emphasised that relations had not been great across the parties, and we had deteriorated into somewhat a toxic culture. I think, again, we will probably recognise that, and we are determined to change that. And that does mean cross-party working. And I know that we're all political animals here in this chamber, and that may not come easy to a lot of us, but it is exactly what we have to do, because we were all elected to represent the best interests of our residents, and that is something I'm determined to do, and I know that my colleagues are too. And so tonight is about saying to government that we are a responsible council, that we have read the reports, we have accepted what you've said, we will work our hardest to get this council on a sustainable and improved position. It's not going to be comfortable at times, but our residents went and voted for us to be responsible, to make this council a successful one, and to ensure delivery of services for them, and that is what we will do. I pledge that we will work together, we will work with our officers, and we will build on some of the improvements that were identified in those reports, particularly around our regeneration scheme, and we will work really hard to bring ourselves to a point where government will not be watching us anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Members, we do have an amendment, and I now call upon Councillor Phil Gilchrist and Chris. Oh, no, I haven't got it on here. Sorry, no, it's on here. Councillor Anderson, do you wish to second that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'll formally second and reserve my right to respond at the end.
That's fine. Members, then, we do have an amendment. I call on Councillors Phil Gilchrist and Chris Carubia to move and second their amendment. Councillor Gilchrist.
So move, Mr. Mayor, and I'll speak once it's formally seconded.
Yeah, so seconded, Mr. Mayor.
As follows, Mr. Mayor. I suggested some weeks ago that the Council itself had to be given time to discuss the budget. I always expected that we would debate the outcome of the Special Policy and Resources meeting. We've all known for years that Wirral needed to create a stable, long-lasting set of services. The issue is how to get from where we are now to where we need to be without creating damage, giving our residents a clear picture of what we can do in the straitjacket we are forced to wear. The Policy and Resources Committee made a decision. The letter has been sent. The decision stands. It has been carried out. This debate does not change it, so has no effect on that. The resolution of Policy and Resources of 30th November was discussed in advance, certainly, but I wish to see what was being sent out in our name from our council. I wanted to consider the content, mood and tone of that letter. The final letter isn't yet on the government website, nor yet with all members, but expressed confidence in stabilising our financial position. Where is the challenge to the government over the potential damage to local services? We all know and have done for much of the past 9 months that many of the services residents value most are not laid down in law. They're not mandatory. What people see around them is decline. A budget reduction of 8.3%, £1 in every 12, is the latest starting point. We all desperately hope that December's settlement will do more for Northern councils, with a fairer funding formula to follow on one day. And members will say, that's just hope, so stop dreaming. Now, members have rightly asked about the powers I voted against at P&R. Consultation were considered necessary. That's putting directors and spokes in an interesting and awkward position. Will members have sufficient opportunities to go through the issues to make constructive challenges? That's why we set up the committee system. And criticisms of the committee system centred on the meeting of the Decision Review Committee that discussed car parking charges, and that issue continues to concern the public. So one example is being used to push for this dismantling process. We created our new system to involve members. I accept ways of working can still be improved. I'm more than happy to work with all parties on that. We are up against a deadline and the straitjacket and powers used by a Conservative government created by Labour 20 years ago. Yes, We still have an opportunity to be open and frank with the public, and we should take it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We will now have a debate on the amendment only and vote before we return to the original motion as amended or otherwise. Do any councillors now wish to speak on the amendment? Okay, Jeff. Paul Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All elected members and political parties have electioneered and campaigned against making difficult decisions over the years, which has contributed to the situation that we're in. And I'm sure none of us want to apologise for taking a stand over particular items over recent years for our own reasons, political and personal. I certainly will not apologise for trying to protect our leisure services, public services, and protect staff from losing their jobs. However, that has come at a cost. That cost is where we are now. We have tried our best, used reserves, and attempted to protect the most vulnerable from the impact of over a decade of dwindling resources. Collectively, we have tried to please everybody in the hope of a white knight coming to the rescue. That white knight did not arrive. The magic money tree does not exist. And now we have to step up, make difficult decisions that we are elected to do, however uncomfortable, whatever the political implications at the ballot box, because our residents deserve better, and we must do better. We are a step away from having all but statutory services grinding to a halt, but we have an opportunity to keep control of our own council and bring it back on track without commissioners coming in, without commissioners causing the fire sale of our assets and providing only statutory services. We have an opportunity to do this without elected members and officers being sidelined. But this will need all councillors, all parties to come together to do this. Clearly, something the Lib Dems are choosing not to do. In P&R, Councillor Gilchrist said that the situation we face, the dilemma, is the worst that I've come across in over 40 years on the council. I agree. But the reports, the two reports that we've had, also say that these issues have been rumbling on for as long as your time in council. So does Councillor Gilchrist accept the part that he will have played in coming to where we are now? Councillor Gilchrist claims that we are in a situation where services have been and are closing by stealth with little consultation, yet has offered little evidence to support this claim. The Lib Dems do not endorse the plan to get the council back on track, and they do not accept the content of the reports. They need to step up to the plate and tell us what the alternative they will propose. What is the alternative we should do for our residents? Without an alternative, they will offer nothing to help us out of this situation. The Lib Dems will abdicate responsibility, and their actions is nothing short of dereliction of duty. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Chris Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be relatively brief. Last week, the Policy and Resources Committee voted to accept the findings of the external reviews and to sign the letter referred to in the motion, which was sent last week to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Therefore, as the decision and action has already been taken, calling this an urgent or emergency motion is something of a misnomer. For the purposes of this council meeting, it seems perfectly reasonable that the amendment is asking for the Policy and Resources decision to respond in writing to the Minister simply to be noted. The extra wording concerning the CIPFA report is only echoing the fact that the CIPFA report itself stresses the importance of involving members early on, providing Policy and Service Committee members with the budgetary information they need so they can collaborate effectively with council officers. So on the basis that the amendment enhances the substantive motion, stressing the positive recommendations of the CIPFA report, I'm happy to say I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Yvonne Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say I found it a little mealy-mouthed of the Liberal Democrat group and their leader to be putting this forward when, as he points out himself, the letter has already gone and the actions will take place. So he knows that the thing which we need to do, the actions we need to take, will be taken. So he can sit back and say, it wasn't me, Gov, I never touched it, my hands are clean. We're not playing that game, Phil, not happening. This is a council that needs to act together. We need to act in a united way. We all read those reports, and we all, as Councillor Williamson said, some of it isn't comfortable reading, and some of us know the parts that we've played in that. And we hear a lot of members coming out with easy answers. Oh, you can fix it this way, you can fix it that way. We know what we've got to do. It's not going to be easy. That phrase, difficult decisions, which I think was repeated 28 times in the CIPFA report, and that's a euphemism for doing lots of unpleasant things in terms of what has to happen to our services. But ultimately, we are here to provide a service to the people of Wirral. And that's what we have to do. If we don't act together as a council to do this, then we won't be providing any service. There will be government commissioners in here who will slash and burn, which is what we've seen in Liverpool, where councillors are not allowed to take any decisions about anything, where officers are not allowed to take decisions. All decisions are taken by commissioners. Everything will be out of our hands, and that's not something that we're prepared to countenance. We won't be supporting this amendment.
Thanks, Yvonne. And next speaker is Councillor Brian Kenny.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I also oppose the amendments, very much on practical grounds, to be honest. Because I remember a couple of years ago, this council agreed to get rid of the old cabinet system and replace it with a committee system. Now, as I understand it, that committee system is based on the idea that committees will deal with something in detail, come back with a recommendation which comes to this council, and the final decision will be made by this council. Now, if you look at the amendments here before us from Councillor Gilchrist, it's talking about deleting the word endorses and inserting the word notes. So where does that lead us? It's not a decision. It just leaves the whole thing up in the air. So what do we do then? If we're just noting the decision of the P&R, does that mean that the whole issue goes back to the next P&R and they discuss it again? Or does it mean that it goes on the agenda of the next full council meeting, which will be next year? And to me, Mr. Mayor, we haven't got the luxury of time saying, well, we'll just note it for now and we'll come back to it, or the P&R will come back to it at some future stage. We haven't got the luxury of that. People outside this room, and I think people in government, will see it as just a bit of a cop-out, and that we're afraid of making difficult decisions. And we have got to make difficult decisions as a council, and none of us in this room, no matter what party we're in, want to make those difficult decisions. I'm sure every one of us will say we didn't stand for election as a councillor in any ward to close this or to close that, or to appease the government when they're saying you got to make cutbacks. But this amendment doesn't bring us forward at all, Mr. Mayor. And I would suggest if anybody in this council chamber tonight doesn't like the motion brought forward by the P&R, then vote against it and come up with something better. But you can't just say, we note the decision. That doesn't bring us forward at all. So, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Mayor, there's sound, practical reasons why this amendment needs to be rejected tonight, and then we'll move on to the debate on the actual motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Stuart Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome the opportunity this referral gives us to comment on the P&R meeting of last Tuesday. When the leader talks about toxic culture in Wirral politics, you only need to watch that debate, frankly. It seemed to me to be nothing more than a lot of unedified name-calling from members who should know better. But, Mr. Mayor, what is our problem? It seems to me that decision-making is being sucked away from the programme committees into policy and resources and toward officers. P&R is morphing into a new cabinet, sidelining committees and sidelining members. Phil expressed concern at the use of delegation to close or downgrade services, describing it as stealthy, and he was asked at that meeting for an example. Well, Mr Mayor, the Europa Fund Pool is shut, despite votes at Leisure Committee to keep it open. The Williamson Art Gallery is closed on a Sunday, despite our being told the new opening hours would include Sunday. Both these decisions, taken under delegation, have cut members out of the process. This is no way to run what is supposed to be a democratic organisation. And Mr Mayor, this trend is completely at odds with the observations in Ada Bairn's report. One of her recommendations, for example, was to develop a financial recovery plan, as if we weren't anyway. But what she says is, the plan to be developed with the active engagement of members. For a committee system council, that surely means all of us, not just P&R or a P&R subcommittee. She refers to the committee system and writes, the committee system is offering greater engagement, and this could be very powerful in bringing members to collective decisions and consensus. Why then are committees being sidelined? Finally, I noted this observation. Members are not receiving clear and consistent information on the council's finances, on the choices open to them, and robust advice on the decisions required. And we're still not, are we? There have been zero details given to us of the impact on services or on the public. It's all heading towards being very last minute and very rushed. Rushed decisions, Mr Mayor, are poor decisions. Surely we've learnt that much. I hope the leader doesn't want to burn her bridges with the Liberal Democrat group, now that she's found new friends in the Conservatives. But I would say to her, the Conservative leader may have signed her letter, but beware that the signature may not be worth the paper that it's written on.
Right. Councillor Alan Braham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I just pick up the point that Councillor Kenny was making, first of all, the decision has been made. Noting it is not changing it, is not pushing it into the long grass. The decision has been taken. It is a matter of fact. What I'm concerned about is really picking up the point that my colleague Councillor Stewart was making, and this is the lack of engagement. If you read the CIPFA report, that word keeps echoing through it. We said we must engage members at an early stage in identifying savings. We must engage members at an early stage to develop a realistic asset disposal strategy. Again, there is still a need to address key concerns about the level of engagement of both officers and members, or officers and members do not engage effectively to develop medium-term budget plans. Well, that is our concern, that most of the councillors here are being frozen out of this process, and we don't want to be. It is incredibly difficult. It is stressful for councillors, even more stressful for the officers who are going to have to come up with the proposals. But they need our support, working, engaging with them in developing the strategy going forward. And it does matter because we're also being told that we need to dispense with some of the democracy to move to 4 yearly elections, as though that is somehow magically going to produce stability within the council. But it does mean that when we come to those elections, there are going to be 66 of us who are going to be accountable for these decisions. And at the moment, the decisions are being taken by P&R or by the finance subgroup of P&R, and most councillors are being frozen out of that process. Remember, in a couple of years' time, all of us are going to be accountable for those decisions which are being taken by a small number of us. And that is the thrust of our amendment this evening. And I do hope councillors will listen carefully to what we're saying and will support the amendment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Next speaker is Councillor Jeff Green.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's very unusual for a Deputy Mayor to speak, but they have done in the past. Yes. And so I felt, on this particular issue, I felt moved to speak, because I've heard from the Liberal Democrat group this idea that there's been no engagement, and if only there were engagement, everything would be sweetness and light. I have witnessed a huge amount of engagement with the leader of the Liberal Democrats. No one could have been more involved, and I commend the leader of the council for the way she's reached out to all political parties. But that was involved in engaging and talking about what needed to be done, working with the officers, what needed to be done, and that was frankly thrown back in her face at policy and resources. So to say this is about if only we were engaged, we'd support it, is abject nonsense. To then say, on top of that, that somehow this is all about the motion, the amendment they put forward is what it is because you've already made a decision, that's about as mealy-mouthed as you can get. What the Liberal Democrats should be doing is actually understanding what everybody else on this council wants to do, and that's work together to get us through the situation. We are where we are. We can all have a discussion at some point, and I'm sure we will, about how we got there. But as Yvonne has said, we all have a collective responsibility now to deal with the situation that we're in. A Labour leader once said, didn't he, that you can't play politics with people's jobs and services. And that, to me, is exactly what the Liberal Democrats are inviting this council to do. And I think that's shameful. There are people who rely on the services that this council provides, a whole range of them, too many to list. For the Liberal Democrats to try and find a way out of taking those decisions is absolutely appalling. And Phil, you're meant to be chairman of the Constitution and Governance Committee that's going to have a role in resolving this. You should really be considering your position. If you believe that you can argue from the sidelines, try and pick up a few votes by arguing for the sidelines, and then want to get involved in the process, then I really think that the council, as well as yourself, should consider your position. A Liberal Democrat once said to the Conservative group when we were talking about budget, read the room, he said. Read the room, what's going on? And I invite Stuart Kelly and the Liberal Democrats to read the room. This is serious. This is time for grown-ups, and I would wish that Liberal Democrats became part of the grown-up party and that this particular amendment is rejected.
Councillor Dave Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a different microphone than normal. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the council. I made a few notes prior to getting up to speak. I'm right in saying that most of the meetings between the group leaders and deputies was in camera and not the rest of the council knew anything about it, if I'm correct in those discussions. I'd like to say, basically, the reason this is in front of us is because the two largest groups were upset by the Liberal Democrats not putting a signature to the letter that was presented. Well, it's now gone to government. This is just a kickback. This is all this is. It's nothing less than the mealy-mouthed politics that the leader of the council constantly goes on about, and being snipey and spiteful to other group members. This is what it's all about, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry to say that. What I just say is that the notes themselves that we had from both reports constantly responded with the statement that engagement with all members was essential. And it was repeated throughout both of those reports. What's happening with P&R and the way things have gone on in the last few months is, to me, going back to what we had with the Cabinet that we had is the reason we're in the position that we're in at this moment. And I'm sorry to say to the Labour group, as their deputy leader said, quite rightly, there is no such thing as a money tree or a shining knight in white armour. There's no one coming over. It's got to be done, and it's got to be done by all members of the council. I find it hard to take this simply because we didn't agree to sign to the letter as a group, we're being castigated. People forget the second half of that note of the motion going forward was a unanimous decision, and that was going to the 4-year cycle for elections. They've quite really forgotten all about that. So I put it down to, personally, a lot of bovine excrements that I've been hearing tonight from the opposite parties. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tony Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to start by saying and giving a message to members that I think what's important here, and some of you will find this quite ironic coming from me, the words which we use are extremely important. They really do matter. And I think, looking at this amendment, I really don't understand the premise and the reasons behind it. I think the time for noting reports as well and truly passed, I think it's much more on our shoulders now that we come up with something a bit more positive, structured, and a bit more dynamic when we're actually looking at what our processes are going to be going forward. I think we need to be using language that not only do all members and officers understand the dire situation that we're actually in, but the members of the public understand that we recognise the dire situation we're in. Moreover, government and the civil servants who are sent here to monitor us understand that we are going to have a plan going forward, and they don't wish to actually come in and take control of the council. I think it was Councillor Brahim has just said that members don't enjoy being frozen out. Well, Councillor Brahim, believe me, all 66 of us will be frozen well and truly out if the commissioners come in, because that's exactly what they're threatening. And I think to water down the amendment, to water down the motion by removing things such as accepting or taking out endorsers for notes is doing just that. It's diminishing our standing and detracting from the position that we're actually putting ourselves in. We need to put our best foot forward and make some positive moves. And the language that we use is important. Councillor Kelly has just said about the council leader finding new friends. Again, it's very rare I disagree with Councillor Kelly, actually. I have the utmost respect for him. But I think that's, again, not the right language to be using at the minute, Stuart, because the leader and I have had our differences, all of our groups have, but the reality is that we're in the committee system, and the whole point of the committee system was that all 66 of us would have a say. Right? You've now got it. That also involves us all working together, like it or not. We don't have to be friends. I'm sure many of you can't stand the sight of me, right? But that's irrelevant. The point is that we have to work together, and I don't think that language was particularly helpful. So again, just to leave it on the message as this. Language matters. Moving forward, we need to pick our words carefully on what we are and what we're not going to do, what we can and what we can't do. And I don't believe that this amendment actually recognises the situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Councillor David Burge-Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't intending to speak, I have to be honest, because I knew lots of people would be speaking, but having listened to what Councillor Gilchrist has said this evening, I felt the need to say something. When I saw the Ada Birds report, I behind closed doors, I stamped my foot, banged my fist, probably said a few rude words, but actually I accepted that we needed to do something as a council, and we needed all of us to do something as a council. And people will know that I'm probably not a socialist, but I am prepared to swallow my pride and work with anybody who loves the Wirral as much as I do. And my view is that the vast majority of people in this room love the Wirral. And that's more important than the politics that we hold, far more important, and will always remain important to me. So when Councillor Brain mentions about, in a few years' time, we may well have to stand before our public and be accountable, I would so much rather be accountable to the public to say that I tried my best to do as much as physically possible to make the Wirral work, than to say to them, I'm afraid I let you down, and allowed people who were strangers to the Wirral and didn't understand its proclivities and its particular peculiarities to come in and wipe everything clean. So I promise today that I will do my utmost to support, obviously, my leader in the first instance, my colleagues, but I will do the best I can to make sure that we transition as quickly most of the things that we need to do very, very quickly. And I would suggest those that feel the need that they can't support it, they possibly leave the field, because quite frankly, we don't have time for stragglers. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joe Bird.
Ooh, difficult decisions. What that's generally code for is pain for the least powerful and the most vulnerable people. We councillors and residents, we're often told the mantra, the council needs to achieve financial stability, we need to balance the budget, there's this huge deficit in the budget. And this is the fourth financial cycle that I've been through, and again we're told, there's 20, 30, 40 million pounds that needs to be saved, and we have to make difficult decisions. And like the report, one of the reports said, this is disingenuous and misleading. I've had a look at the Wirral Council's accounts, and I've made the graphs into 3D here, so it's fairly easy to understand. This is the spending of Wirral Council from 2010 up to the budget for 2021-22. It shows that gradually it's actually going up, though there was a low here. This is the spending for adults, for children's services, and for all other services. You can see there's no big earthquake happening here. There's no huge reduction, especially since 2017.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, could Councillor Bird hold that up, because we can't see what it is from here. Thank you.
It's not possible to hold it up, but it'll be here for the whole of the rest of the meeting. Yeah. Okay. And these charts here show the reserves that we have. We can see the unlimited reserves, the general fund reserves, have stayed low at 10.7 million the last 3 years. They were higher, but the earmarked reserves, they've gone up and up in recent years to this. Last March, £114 million in earmarked reserves. This is one of the reasons why the external auditor has not issued a report in the public interest, why we're not close to bankruptcy. We've got £114 million in reserves, that 26 million of that is for COVID. Some of that could be used to reduce the loan that's needed for other services as well, related to COVID, obviously. So I find it quite kind of misleading and scaremongery to say, the commissioners are going to come in if we don't take all these difficult decisions, when the evidence from the accounts doesn't show that. They raise more questions that hopefully other people can answer also. They show that there's no budgetary justification for cuts to frontline services, nor for compulsory redundancies. Council income and spending on non-statutory services has increased every year since 2017. We're not at the door of the commissioners We have got room to move. We're not in a terrible situation. Though I'm not saying they haven't got work to do. We do have work to do. And we need to be making informed political choices, not be rushed into decisions that we haven't had chance to scrutinise or understand in the detail that we need to. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Leslie Rennie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'll just start off by probably disappointing everybody because unlike Councillor Bird, I don't have any props here tonight. But what I do actually have, Mr Mayor, and I'm surrounded by people who probably share the same acquisition, is that I do have a backbone. And what's happened here tonight and what happened at P&R was nothing short of reprehensible. And I did say that at the time. If we go back, Mr Mayor, 30 years, this coming May, I was first elected into the Prenton ward. And although it was, like everybody, first time up, not expecting to win. But what we did have then was we had 7 Liberal Democrats in Prenton ward. And we played our slogan with 7 empty seats because they were always sitting on the fence. 30 years ago, Mr Mayor, it doesn't appear that anything has changed at all, apart from the fact I think there is actually 6 empty seats this time. Is there not a loose count of how many seats they have? Clearly, what is happening with Councillor Gilchrist and his allies here tonight is that he's purely electioneering, and I have to tell him it won't work. The people in Oxton have done the right thing in electing their new councillor. I have no problem with that, and I congratulate him and the team around him. But they will not fall for this issue of sitting on the fence time and time again. It's absolutely ridiculous, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, it is cheap electioneering and it raises my blood pressure. But there is one certain message that needs to go back here to government tonight, and that is quite clear. It is to tell them that there are certain parties on this council, excluding the Liberal Democrats, who have a backbone. We will get the job done, Mr Mayor, with those other colleagues from all different parties, and we will ensure that we put this borough back in the fantastic position which it should be. A famous borough, famed for its coastline, famed for its tourism, famed for its shipbuilding, and it's all going to be destroyed by the likes of the Liberal Democrats. I say to government, of whatever colour this was, and this one happens to be mine, that we will not let that happen. And as I say, there are people here tonight from plenty of the other parties who have that backbone to get the job done, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Steve Fowkes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I definitely wasn't going to speak tonight for obvious reasons. But clearly we do have a situation and we are at a point where we've had to, and we all voted for it last year, capitalisation, to tide the budget over so we didn't have to make some really awful decisions last year, a capitalisation and a loan from the government. The minute we did that, then we should have expected that we would be scrutinised by government. We all accepted that budget, Lib Dems, everyone. In fact, credit to the leader, it was the first time I've seen a budget with all parties supporting it. Okay, first committee meeting after that, we started trying to unpick it. I won't lay the level of blame at anybody, but we did try to unpick it, which we were criticised for in the report. What I can't accept in the amendment is the fact that it says acknowledging and removing the word accepting. Whenever in the history of this council we had an external report by professionals that we've not accepted, whether it's been in a children's services report or it's been in any other report, the first thing you have to say about that report is that is a useful tool that describes the problem you are in at that time, whether you think it's politically motivated or whatever. Those professionals, CIPFET are professionals, and they've come up with a report that puts us right behind. So whatever grand statements people make in this, the figures probably ain't going to change an awful lot. It's not made easy. Government has made life terribly difficult in local government. £250 million from this council's budget over the years. Fact, austerity was the child of the Lib Dem and Tory government. When they got together, they started austerity as a pact. We've had to deal with that. At least in the Labour Party, I can hold my head up high and say I'm campaigning for an alternative. I'm campaigning for a government that actually recognises us, local governments, as the fourth emergency service. We help so many people on a daily basis. We should be taken seriously and funded properly. However, we are not in that situation. It's not helped that we get our government settlement every year, but we're told to do a 5-year plan. We don't get it till after half the budget decisions have had to be considered. We don't get it till the 15th of December, our government settlement. But nobody in this room and none of the professionals are predicting that that will be anything other than the same old famine. No feast coming round the corner. So we are, coin a phrase, we are where we are. We have to make some difficult decisions. Now, how we deliver the services in the future, that is engagement. That's what engagement is, Phil. It's about saying, well, we are in a difficult situation. Here's how we're going to do it differently to protect as many of our citizens as we can on a day-to-day basis. That's what I signed up for as a councillor. Whatever the circumstances, you do your best. And that's all we're asking everyone in this chamber to do. Do your best. Not jump ship. Not have an excuse to say it wasn't me. Not on my watch. We're all in it together, and let's get it done together.
And that is the last of the speakers. So all members have had the opportunity. We now move to the second of the amendments. Councillor Chris Carubia, you now have 3 minutes to speak to the amendments, Chris.
Listening to some of those comments, I think I'm going to need a bit longer than 3 minutes. I just want to answer some of the comments that have been made before I start with what I've actually decided to say. In answer to Councillor Rennie and a backbone, I think you need to have a good backbone to be able to stand against everybody else's opinion. So I think we do have a backbone. I'm a bit annoyed about that one. Steve's report. Steve says we should go with all the professional reports that come in. We should agree with them all. Well, if that was the case, not long ago we did a library report that cost us about 90k that went straight in the bin. So I would question anybody who doesn't question reports that come from whatever professional body leaves themselves open to various things. Councillor Burgess-Joyce says we should leave the field. That's a really good one for democracy. Anyway, when I first became a councillor, it wasn't an easy task being a smaller party to get your voice heard, I must say. But then Pat Hackett became leader of the ruling party in the council, and he put us firmly on a path of cooperation and compromise, which I'm pleased to say continues under our current leader. I am and am an advocate for the committee system, where I believe cooperation and compromise is key to its ongoing success. But while we may not always agree, that being the nature of politics, we must be able to listen to other parties' points of view calmly and rationally and be able to debate them in the same fashion. And that is why we all as members sign up to a code of conduct, something which I believe was sadly absent in a recent Policy and Resources Committee meeting that I witnessed. Much was said about the government watching that meeting of leaders and committee chairs, and I wonder what they and the public thought of some of that behaviour that went on that night. Now, our amendments before you this evening does not detract from the motion, which is already going through, but enhances and enforces the need to work together now more than ever, by asking, as the SIPFA report calls for, members to be engaged at an earlier stage. Our aim should be to protect local services with whatever additional funding we can still secure, so I welcome the finance training to all members commencing the 8th of this month. So while we may not all agree with the recommendations, we do accept them going forward, and we will work with all parties and officers, as always, in the interest of the borough and our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right. The next one then is the right to reply, which is proposed with the original motion. Councillor Williamson, you now may have the right to reply and may address the council for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where to start, really? Okay, Stuart Kelly, I'm not going to, I have took acting lessons off you in the past and you've been pretty good, but I'm not going to do the faux outrage bit at your comments. I think I've worked to build a good relationship with all parties in this chamber. That doesn't mean I'm on the Christmas card list of the members' offices. And I think the current leader and his two predecessors will testify that our relations have been somewhat difficult. However, I am being grown up, and that is what is required in this situation. So if you want to see that as a weakness in me, then that's fine. You're entitled to that. Thank you for your interactive presentation, Councillor Baird. I'm sure the blue piece of badge is on its way. There was just too many inaccuracies there for me to even start on that, but I do appreciate the effort that you've put in. I'm not going to really say much more than that. I'm not going to engage in any personal stuff here. I believe the P&R meeting that Chris you're referring to, feelings were running high and people were really angry. And I think what Councillor Gilchrist did not only surprised and shocked us, I think it surprised and shocked you and his own group. So when Councillor Gilchrist, you talk about member engagements, you need to start by engaging with your own group first. Thank you.
There being no further speakers, I will now move to the vote on the... The amendments.
We're not on the resolution.
We'll get to that in a minute. There being no further speakers, I will now move to the vote on the amendments. Are we going to just... All those in favour, please show. Oh, Mr. Baird. All those against? Any abstentions? No. So what was the middle one? Any votes against? 48. The results are those in favour 11, against 48, no abstentions. No abstentions. So therefore we now move to the substantive motion.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, could I just ask Mr. McCourt's guidance, with your permission? Looking at what I call the Mayor's script, we now move solely to Councillor Anderson on the original motion passed by the committee. No other speakers appear to be invited. I'd just like to see your guidance on that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Mayor, I believe the Mayor was just about to invite speakers on the original motion.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm calling for speakers on the original motion now. Anyone wish to speak? Pat Cleary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just preface my comments by referring to the Marmot Community Workshop that took place last week as part of the Health and Wellbeing Board's work programme. And I'd like to place on record how pleased I am that the Council is now following the Marmot place-based approach. But I'd like to quote from the report that we were given in conjunction with that workshop. The note said, austerity policies during the decade 2010 to 2020 in England are associated with worse health and widening health inequalities. Life expectancy stopped rising, and in more deprived areas, life expectancy actually declined, and regional inequalities widened. These deteriorations in health were on a scale and severity not seen during the 20th century. Subsequently, COVID-19 has revealed and amplified inequalities in society and in health. So, Mr. Mayor, the poorer members of our communities are dying sooner, and health outcome gaps between the rich and the poor have widened over the past decade due to government austerity policies. Now, that's not the Green Party saying that, it's not any political party saying that, it's health experts saying that. Okay, so I think we need to remember, in the context of this debate, who the bad guys really are. Most of our financial problems are because of relentless austerity over a prolonged period of time. And Councillor Mitchell said earlier that we were in this position because the Cabinet had made bad decisions. And we have made some bad financial decisions. And we've spent much of the last 18 months or so unwinding some of those decisions. But the bulk of our problems are government austerity. And we have senior officers in the Finance Department telling us that, yes, we're in a very serious financial position, but so are councils up and down the country. And some of them are in much worse position than us. So we are told, and we are prepared to accept as the Green Group, that we have to accept these conditions because the alternative will be commissioners. So we've accepted that on good faith, and we will proceed on that basis. And that is the context in which we have signed the letter. But it's fair to say of the Lib Dems, would they have refused to sign it if that decision was pivotal in the whole process? And in fairness, their amendment, although we supported it, was about process. It wasn't about the fundamental issues that we are facing as a council. So I also would refer back to Councillor Kenny's comments earlier that the amendment doesn't move the process forward. Well, this whole motion doesn't move the process forward. It's really been tabled as another opportunity to have a go and make some political points. The decision has been made. We've signed the letter, most of us. And as I say, we are proceeding in good faith on that basis, but we don't welcome this motion, and we will be abstaining from the vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Phil Gurkers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'll forgive me, we're still having some sight problems with working with one eye, but I'll cover some of the issues if I may. Councillor Cleary has spoken strongly about public health inequalities, and we get a public health grant. And had we not had this motion tonight, and if we hadn't followed the course of action I asked about having time to debate this, we might well have had a motion on public health grant that I was working on, because public health grants come late in the year, come late in the announcements, late in the process, and are difficult to plan ahead from. I want to just refer to last spring's budget, because it's been pointed out that we all supported it. So we're all guilty because we knew of an underlying situation, but perhaps didn't completely acquaint ourselves with every aspect of it. But much has been said about commissioners. Now, I have been reading the letters sent to Liverpool, the letters sent to Slough. The Slough letter runs to about 10 pages. We are not Liverpool with the interesting situations that develop there. We are not Slough, where all sorts of things appear to be broken down. We are not Slough, where governance has broken down. And we are not Slough because officers aren't reporting things to us. And we are not Slough because in June and July this year, they had 7 committee meetings, or would have done, but they cancelled them all, which I think brings us to the point. It is no use, in my view, and this is where we parted company, but we understand where we are, and we now have to reflect on what Council just decided. The issue is that we, meeting, the Finance Committee, Councillor Green referred to me particularly, and also as Chair of Constitution Committee, that elite of finance is meeting and taking views, but for the most part, Members do not know the detail of what's going on there. They haven't seen the slideshows. They may see the slideshows on Wednesday. They may get more financial training on Wednesday. But an awful lot is going on, a bit like ducks swimming under the surface. There's a lot of work being done, but it's not out with us as members, and it is not out with the public, certainly. We've consulted the public about services many times over the last few years, but those reports on leisure and sports facilities are buried, not yet public. And the public probably don't know, as we do, what's in the table that was in the CIPFA report, comparing all the spend on neighbourhood services with others. So the implications have not come across to the public, and that's what's concerning us. So, Mr. Mayor, we were challenged to take part and be serious and grown up, whatever it might be. I certainly will do all I can to assess the situation. I see the red light's on. I will sit down, Mr. Mayor.
Any further speakers? Where's that? What's his name? O'Ron. Councillor O'Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, good evening, everybody, in slightly tense atmosphere. But thank you for your warm reception to me earlier. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I wasn't a councillor. As a resident, I'd heard very little about the council's financial issues, and I suspect many members of the public would actually say the same. To me, this is a significant lack of meaningful public engagement. Evidence shows that once you're in an organisation for more than 6 months, you start to suffer from institutional blindness, no matter how much insight you may have. Councillor Cox mentions that language matters. I couldn't agree more. I'm surprised by the language, the tone of voice and animosity used by many councillors. I've held leadership roles in NHS, universities and previously on the Royal College of Physicians of London Council. Anybody who acted in a way displayed at PNR would be reprimanded by the chair, and such behaviour would not be tolerated. I suggest that councillors should reflect on the council's code of conduct. Let's not forget that everything we say is being recorded for the public to see. We have also had political leaders who have been attacked in recent times, so we have a responsibility to act in a professional manner. The most effective leaders in history from all parties facilitate meaningful but respectful debate. As political leaders, we need to be exemplars in how to be civil and work together. I'm pleased to see that the tone is somewhat more civilised tonight, but maybe not unanimously. We have had issue with the way this process has gone about, not the fact that difficult decisions need to be made. We're focused as a party in helping our residents and coming to a solution with the council as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olson, and congratulations on your maiden speech. Next speaker is Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, and well done on your maiden speech, and congratulations on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This week I was privileged to spend time with Dr. Meredith Belbin, creator of Belbin Team Roles, a man in his 90s with so much still to offer and still writing his book, which he went through with me in a lot of detail. Now, we are required to work together to break the habits that have gone before. And we find ourselves again, I'm afraid, with a nonsensical amendment that's wholly unnecessary tonight. The amendment doesn't accept the reports or endorse the decision. And it's time now for us to become a cohesive team, dare I say it, for the good of our residents and for all of us to try to work together. And many of the comments tonight have actually been working towards that. And I would encourage and commend us for all to try to do that still further. And I really would commend the leaders here of the Conservative group and of the Labour group of working together and discussing things and reaching a commonality of agreement, because agreement is not easy, but we're all asked to do that collectively tonight and going forwards. Thank you.
Got no further speakers? Right. Does Councillor Anderson wish to exercise his right to speak as seconder of the original motion for 3 minutes?
I certainly do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. And can I first of all congratulate Councillor Stanley on a maiden speech. It's tradition in this council that we always listen in silence and applaud at the end, which we did, but I have to say to him, and actually Councillor Carubia, that if you think there was a breach of the code of conduct there, then I look forward to defending myself at the standards complaint. And I wouldn't be so crass as to reveal private conversations, but it's certainly not what you said to me, Councillor Carubia, when we spoke after that P&R. But, you know, going back to the original, Mr. Mayor, you know, the reports were stark. They made for grim conclusions. And if I'm honest, it wasn't really that surprising. And as someone who lives Wirral and was elected to serve it, it was really some uncomfortable reading. Some will ask how on earth we got into this situation and who are those responsible. And there'll be right questions to ask, but as others said, we've had those arguments in the past and we will have them again in the future, but now is not the time. We have to take urgent action to correct the council's finances and to reduce the enormous structural deficit that, quite frankly, is eye-watering next year. Because if we don't all work together, we'll be in section 114 territory. The council will run out of money, will effectively be bankrupt. And first, you know, I would like to actually thank Joe Bird on that for a fascinating economic lecture. I have to say that I fear Milton Friedman's legacy might be a bit usurped there, but we'll go on, we'll see about that. But, you know, there is a window of opportunity, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the leader, actually. It's not often we agree. It's not often that we've actually got on in the past. You know, we've had our difficulty over many years, but she has actually reached out to all parties, and I thank her for that, because we haven't got overall control in this council. No party has it. We're all going to have to work together to do that, and the window is narrowing very quickly. And if we don't accept and endorse external assurance review, then we might as well all go home, because it isn't a pick and mix. We can't just choose what we like and what we don't like. Certain aspects I didn't like, but have to suck it up, swallow it and get on with it, because otherwise we won't be here, commissioners will be running it, and as Councillor Stewart said, you know, it won't be a pleasant sight. Just to address some of the things that have been spoken about. So Councillor Braham and the Lib Dems have quoted, oh, well, you know, let's note it, you know, it's a different note in it than endorse it. No, this council has to endorse it. This council has to endorse those recommendations. And to quote, I think Councillor Braham and Mitchell were going to the Ada Burns report and then saying, well, it says this, we need to consult all members, we need to do all this. Your leader voted against the 4 key things that were in those recommendations, and just let me read them out. Develop a financial recovery plan, appoint an independent panel to support the council, moving the council to whole system of elections, subject to consultation. Okay, you did subsequently vote for that, but that was in there. And review the committee system to reduce the number of committees. That's what your leader at P&R voted against. The key recommendations of those 2 reports that all other parties had to come together and vote for. So don't sit here tonight and say, oh, well, you know, and pick and choose. You can't do that. It's absolutely absurd that you've done that. It's absolutely absurd now that you're tinkering with words and amendments to say, oh, we want to note it. You know, do you accept it? Do you endorse it? That's what it comes down to, because this council has to do that to move on, because there's a massive structural deficit there, and if we don't sort that, we might as well not be here, and it won't be good for the interests of our residents that we're all elected to serve. There's going to be budget envelopes there that all committees are going to have to work within. And to say there's been no consultation, well, we had consultation. Ada Burns came up and gave us consultation. The leaders have been meeting every week, and the financial committee has been every week. And Councillor Gilchrist, you've been sat in all of them. So to say members weren't consulted is completely untrue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's it, it's back on now. Right. Does Councillor Williamson wish to exercise her right of reply as proposer of the original motion for 3 minutes?
No, I think everything that needs to be said has been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. We will then move to the vote on the substantive motion. Can't vote.
Thank you, members. There were sufficient members requesting a recorded vote. When I read out your name, if you could please press your microphone and then say whether you are for, against the motion or are abstaining. Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Berry.
For.
Councillor Bird.
Against.
Councillor Booth.
For.
Councillor Brain.
For.
Councillor Brennan.
For.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
For.
Councillor Cameron.
For.
Councillor Campher.
For.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Corubia.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
Abstain.
Councillor Clements.
For.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Collinson.
For.
Councillor Cook.
Abstain.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor George Davies.
For.
Councillor Fowkes.
For.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Gilchrist.
For.
Councillor Gorman.
Abstain.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Gray.
For.
Councillor Hayes.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
For.
Councillor Cathy Hodson.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Jones. Adrian Jones.
For.
Councillor Chris Jones.
For.
Councillor Tony Jones.
For.
Councillor Jordan.
For.
Councillor Kelly.
For.
Councillor Kenny.
For.
Councillor Daisy Kenny.
For.
Councillor Lewis. Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor McLaughlin.
For.
Councillor McManus.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Mountain. Councillor Nolan.
For.
Councillor O'Hagan.
For.
Councillor Sonlu.
For.
Councillor Poville.
For.
Councillor Rennie.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Rowlands. Councillor Smith. Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Jason Walsh.
Abstain.
Councillor Joe Walsh.
For.
Councillor Whittingham.
For.
Councillor Irene Williams.
For.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
For.
Councillor Steve Williams.
For.
Councillor Williamson.
For.
Councillor Wood.
For.
And Councillor Wright.
For.
Thank you, members.
The result is votes in favour 54, votes against 1, abstentions 4. So that vote, is carried. And I was just going to suggest we are now at 7:20. We've turned the main piece over, so I'm going to call for a 10-minute break. And please, can we be back in 10 minutes? Thank you. Okay, we're now up to members' questions. Being one member's question submitted in advance of the meeting this evening, I would like to invite Councillor Cleary to ask a question on behalf of Councillor Emily Gleaves to Councillor Tony Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is as follows. The future location of Birkenhead Market has been determined, and there is now clarity that the market will remain in its current location for several more years. Market traders have brought forward proposals to reorganise the internal layout of the market. This would block off central areas within the market, creating a more structured, easy to navigate and easier to manage layout. This has the support of many traders and would improve the overall customer experience. It would help to reduce running costs and attract more trade into the market. Please clarify the management position regarding this proposal and what barriers, if any, exist regarding its implementation. And my second question is, at the Economy, Regeneration and Development meeting held on the 22nd of November, representatives from the Birkenhead Market Tenants Association expressed concern at a range of expenditure totalling £127,000 relating to extra assistance for the market manager, advertising spend and the purchase of gazebos for the now abandoned relocation of the temporary market. Please clarify what measures are in place to consult with market traders going forward on significant items of expenditure that directly impact on the running costs of the market, and to review and reallocate marketing expenditure in consultation with market traders. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I thank you, Councillor Cleary? Could you pass on my thanks to having written notification of the question, please? Council fully supports the idea of consolidation, but needs to ensure first and foremost that all aspects proposed are safe and comply with all legislative requirements. A more comprehensive answer will be provided in writing, but due to the complexity of this work involved in delivering a project of this nature and the funding required. In short, barriers to implementation would include budget, structural integrity, emergency evacuation planning, fire safety, emergency lighting, and electrical regulation. That's the first answer, Councillor Cleary. Second answer, expenditure items listed on a previous question by the Birkenhead market traders community have no direct impact on the running costs of the market. This was answered at the ERD committee when we had our meeting on the 22nd of November. Officers are committed to discussing ideas and plans with the market traders community and welcome input into these. However, it is not always possible, as I'm sure you're well aware, to share budget data that is commercially sensitive information. And the third and final part, the recent marketing activity has not been funded through an operational budget associated with the market, but secured through grant funding, which is limited by restriction and timeframes on spend. The campaign has been developed with the support of the Council's experienced marketing department, and attempts were made 5 times over a 2-month period by the management of the market to engage with the Birkenhead market traders community regarding elements of Christmas and the build-up. Unfortunately, no reply was forthcoming. The market needed to confirm the campaign in advance so it would not miss out on any funding it had received. So there are the 3 answers, Councillor Cleary. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I do have a supplementary question, if that's okay, Mayor. Thank you for the answers, Councillor Jones. Since the questions were submitted, there has been a meeting with the Director of Regeneration and the Manager of Birkenhead Market One of the positive suggestions coming out of that meeting was to establish a working party involving the market management and representatives from the trader groups. So I think that's a very positive suggestion, and I was hoping that as chair of the Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee, you would be able to at least give support to taking that that recommendation further.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. I can see no reason why that can't be considered. Thank you for the supplementary question.
Thank you.
There being no further questions, we will move on. Item 5, matters required approval or consideration by the Council. A, Capital Monitoring Quarter 2, 2020-2021. This is a referral from the Policy and Resources Committee held on the 10th of November 21. I call on Councillor Jeanette Williamson to move the recommendations detailed in the report. I call upon Councillor Yvonne Nolan to second.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
So seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Opposing the motion, Councillor Williamson, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
I won't be speaking, Mr. Mayor.
Then debate. Are there any people who wish to debate that? No. Right. Seconder the motion, Councillor Yvonne Nolan. You now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
I won't take up Council's time, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williamson, I'm wasting my time, I think, on this one. Councillor Williamson, you now have your right of reply and may address the Council for up to 3 minutes. There being no further comments, we will move to the vote.
I won't be speaking.
Thank you. Then I move straight to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Any votes against? No votes against. Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. 5B, draft statement of policy under the Gambling Act 2005. This is a referral from the Licensing Act Committee held on the 24th of November 2021. I call upon Councillor Andrew Hodson to move the recommendations detailed in the report. I call upon Councillor Chris Jones to second.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hodson, you have 5 minutes to speak to your motion. I am not aware of any amendments, so I propose we move to the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. All I would like to say is this is a very important policy that has to be undertaken by the Council on a regular basis by law. And I'd like to put on the minutes my thanks to Margaret O'Donnell and the officers who worked with her to create this very intricate policy, and thank them for all their hard work. I know I'll be joined in that with my Vice Chair. Thank you.
Are there any speakers? Yes. What?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to speak on this if I can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the 2005 Gambling Act, whatever it claimed to do, in reality liberalised gambling laws to allow advertising to spread like wildfire through social media and TV, with sponsorship and betting adverts emblazoned across the country's sports shirts and stadiums. It is now impossible for problem gamblers to avoid exposure to temptation. Online gambling has thrived in recent years, with the COVID lockdown providing ideal conditions for more people to become addicted to gambling. The UK gambling industry now takes £14 billion per annum from punters. And from when the Act came into force in 2007 to just 2015, 8 years, this rose by 65%. An article in The Guardian, as recently as last Saturday, 4th December, highlighted the fact that around 400 suicides each year are associated with the despair caused by problem gambling. Statistically, that would mean at least 2 suicides per annum in Wirral, perhaps more given the level of social deprivation in the borough. Only 2 cases of gambling-related suicides have apparently been investigated by the Gambling Commission out of around 2,000 suicides over the past 5 years. Against this background, I find it disappointing that the Licensing Committee meeting held on 24th November to consider the Council's draft gambling and betting policy produced so little debate. Indeed, the whole meeting lasted barely 16 minutes. One of the licensing objectives is to protect children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. Had I been allowed to attend this meeting as deputy, I might have questioned, for example, why the Wirral policy, which was reviewed every 3 years, does not designate for a special concern certain areas of deprivation in the borough where people are more likely to be vulnerable to excessive gambling. In my view, a policy which merely states that applications for licences will be viewed on a case-by-case basis is inadequate. We all know of commercial areas with 2 or more betting shops. I find that excessive. I would also have asked how many gambling licences have been refused over the past 3 years by the Council, how regularly inspections have been carried out of betting shops and other gambling premises, and how many licences have been withdrawn as a result. The draft report cites a long list of statutory consultees. Given that, according to the licensing officer, only the Betting and Gambling Council responded to the consultation, and they aren't even a consultee, I wonder how well publicised the consultation from 1st October to 18th November actually was. I hope the Council's licensing team, officers and committee members will give my observations serious consideration during future reviews of the Council's gambling policy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, the councillor must be aware as deputy leader he's allowed to attend any meeting he wants to. So the fact he didn't bother to attend the licensing meeting.
I was told I couldn't.
Well, if he wants to tell me, if he wants to discuss.
Please, Andy. Thank you. Don't want to talk and cross in the council, please. Right. Are there any other speakers? No. Then we move on to seconder of the motion. Councillor Jones, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'd like to say, first of all, that probably all of us who sit on that committee are very aware of the problems that gambling can cause, particularly to people in the more deprived areas of Wirral. As a previous cabinet member for adult care and public health, during my time, the annual report of the Director of Public Health was all about gambling. So it's something that public health are very much aware of as well. It is a shame, I think, that you didn't attend the meeting, but this is, you know, something that we need to build on as a whole council, really. And I think the difficulty with gambling now is it's so easy to go online and gamble, and that's where one of the biggest problems are. I work with somebody whose son was, well, broken down marriage, ended up in prison. So, you know, on a personal level, I know how distressing it can be for a whole family when they're caught up in gambling. But I hope as a licensing committee, we will do our best in this area, but I think it's something that the whole council needs to be aware of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Hodgson, you now have the right of reply and may address the council for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. In answer to the councillor's request with regards to information, I am sure if he writes to me with the things he's just quoted, I am more than happy to ensure that all the figures he was asking for, I'll ensure he's made aware of. Thank you.
Then we move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Any votes against? And any abstentions? One abstention. That's carried. We move to item 5C, appointments of independent members to the Audit and Risk Management Committee. This is a referral from the Audit and Risk Management Committee held on the 30th of November 21. I call on Councillor Cathy Hodson to move the recommendations detailed within the report, and I call upon Councillor Whittingham to second them.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
You now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
I don't wish to speak. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I don't know. Oh, sorry. Right, we're just getting down to that now. Sorry. Are there any speakers? Got one, Councillor Joe Baird.
I'd like to move an amendment. Sorry, wrong one.
We move to second of the motion, Councillor Whittingham. You now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing really further to add, except that by appointing independent persons to the Audit Risk Committee is an example of best practice, and I think it's something the Council should fully support.
And then right of reply, Cathy Hodson. You now have your right of reply and may address the Council for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just fully endorse what Councillor Whittingham has said, and I'd like to thank Councillor Whittingham, whose suggestion it was to have 2 independent members. The Redmond Review recommended that we had at least 1 independent member. Normally, we do struggle to find anybody that wants to be an independent member, which is not remunerated. They'll sit on the Audit and Risk Committee management meeting for up to 5 times a year. It's non-voting, non-remuneration, and we had 2 candidates. Both brought different attributes to the party, and so we decided, after having taken legal advice, that there was no problem in having 2 independent members, and as a consequence it means if either one of them is ill, we always have an independent member on the panel. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Then we move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Are there any votes against? Any abstentions? No, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move to 5D, revision to the appointment of committees. This is a report of the Director of Law and Governance requesting the Council to A. Agree the revised proportionality in the political composition of membership of ordinary committees of the Council as set out in Appendix A, and B, and appoint Councillor Joe Baird to sit on the Council's Regulatory and General Purposes Committee and Licensing Act Committee and the Pensions Committee. I call upon Councillors Williamson and Nolan to move the recommendations.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
So second, Mr. Mayor.
Opposed of the motion, Councillor Williamson, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
I don't need to speak to you, thank you.
Thank you. Proposer of the amendments, Councillor Burt. Sorry, members, we do have an amendment. Sorry about that. I call on Councillors Joe Baird and Pat Cleary to move and second their amendments. Proposer of the amendments, Councillor Baird, you now have 3 minutes to speak to the amendments.
Thank you, and Mazel Tov to Councillor Orod Osanlu for his first speech this evening. The Labour Party have expelled me for speaking at a meeting 3 years ago and for signing a petition almost 2 years ago. These were organised by Labour Against the Witch Hunt, and Labour banned that organisation only 4 months ago. But the Labour Party has applied retrospective punishment against me and many other people. Because what I did at the time was perfectly legitimate. The Labour Party changed the rules after that, only 4 months ago. But I won't lie to you, I am delighted to have been expelled by the Labour Party. I'm free now from the Labour Party's hostile environment, where Jewish people like me are 31 times more likely to be investigated for talking about the racism that we face. I'm free from the fear of disciplinary action for exercising my human rights of freedom of expression and freedom of association to speak and meet with other people. More than 2,000 people of Bromborough, Port Sunlight and New Ferry re-elected me last May for 4 years with 61% of votes, and I will continue to work for this fantastic community as a local independent councillor. I was elected to promote justice and equality, to protect lives and livelihoods, enhance jobs, services and our environment, and to oppose cruel cuts. My values and work have not changed. The Labour Party has changed from the party that I joined in 2015. It's become nasty, toxic and humourless. The leader of the Labour Party writes in the Sun newspaper, re-traumatising bereaved communities most unnecessarily. And we have seen this evening Labour voting with the Tories. This is an unholy alliance, and it's not going to go well for our council, our workforce, nor our communities. Turning to the fair appointment to committees, it would be fair that my amendment is approved. It would appoint me to the Housing Committee and Pensions Committee. Policy committees like housing, they make decisions and recommendations that directly affect residents of Bromborough, including about the council's budget. There are 66 places on 6 policy committees and 66 councillors elected by Wirral residents. In addition, there's another 15 places on Policy and Resources Committee. So it would only be fair, reasonable and proportionate to appoint an elected councillor to a policy committee if they want to. And why? Why should one councillor out of 66 be singled out for exclusion from any policy committee? Perhaps that would be from nastiness or something else. Thank you.
Can I just confirm, sorry Pat, that you're seconding this?
Yeah, I am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debate. We now have a debate on the amendments only and vote before we return to the original motion as amended or otherwise. Do any councillors wish to speak on the amendments? Okay. Steve Fowkes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it is a little bit, well, very disappointed that another party has involved itself in seconding such a motion. It can only be for mischievous reasons, one would suspect. However, the Labour Party has rules. People should... Sorry, that was a racist remark. Would you like to remove that? Okay, maybe not. Anyway, so the Labour Party has rules, very strong rules, strict rules, and is going through a period of changing the rules. I think it's incumbent on anyone who is elected as a Labour councillor to stick to those rules and not jeopardise their position as an elected member for the Labour Party. And I remember when other members who felt they couldn't stay within the Labour Party moved to an independent status, and colleagues such as Joe Baird were shouting from the rooftops there should be a by-election because you were elected as a Labour councillor and you stand as a Labour councillor. You are not a Labour councillor, you are an independent. So I suggest that you do the right thing, call a by-election, and let's have the people of Bromborough make the decision and elect another Labour councillor or whoever. You may win, I doubt it. And I just want to say, you know, that's the way it is in politics. You conduct yourselves in every manner to try and stay within the Labour Party. That's my motto. Whatever you disagreement with the leadership or whoever, you stay in and you fight for the Labour Party to be a better place. I think it is becoming a better place to be. That's my experience, and it doesn't reflect the scenario that Councillor Bird reflects. So I would ask for a by-election to be called immediately. It's the honourable thing to do.
Councillor Julie McManus.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm disappointed that Councillor Bird accuses the Labour Party of being racist. As a member of that party, I'm not racist, and I would hope that she'd reconsider that comment. And following on from my colleague, Councillor Fawkes, you were elected as a Labour councillor, Joe, and I would like to see you call a by-election. And let's put it to the vote of the individuals who live in that ward that you currently represent. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Stuart Worthington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to repeat colleagues' comments regarding the by-election, but I'd just like to be helpful, because if the Green Party think that Councillor Bird should be on the Housing Committee, maybe they could give up their place rather than asking for the Labour members to give up their place on the Housing Committee. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to stray into the issues internal to the Labour Party. I observe that the Housing Committee meets not as regularly as I would like, but it has a job to do. Councillor Bird has always shown, in my experience and the material I've read that she's put out with colleagues in Eastham and Bromber other areas, a close interest in housing, and that a close interest in our registered social landlords, and an interest in poor housing conditions. On that basis, I'd ask members to consider what she can bring to the committee and vote about that, and not on personalities or disagreements that have taken place.
Is that it? Okay. Councillor Cleary, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the amendments.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Well, first of all, I'd echo the last points that were made. That really, as Councillor Bird said, there's 66 councillors, 66 committee places. No councillor should be excluded from the policy of this committee. And as somebody who was excluded from any scrutiny role on policy for 5 years, I think that really conflicts with what we're being asked to do through the external assurance reviews, that councillors work together. I think we should be acknowledging that, and we should be seeking to use the best of all our talents. And the original proposal tonight doesn't do that. And as Councillor Gilchrist has said, Councillor Bird has played an active role on housing. She sat on housing. Let her continue on housing and make a positive contribution. To suggest that this is a mischievous amendment is insulting, I would say. It's completely inaccurate. It is done out of principle. I would do the same in similar circumstances for any member from any party who was in the same circumstances. I would support their wish to stay on scrutiny and on policy. So it's also, frankly, it's difficult to think of any other institution that would deliberately undermine members. I mean, in an employment situation, this would be grounds for constructive dismissal. So ultimately, as well, it is disrespectful to voters and anti-democratic. That's what it is. And if you would disapprove of this kind of behaviour in an employment setting, can I speak without being... It's very rude. I didn't interrupt any of you guys. Okay. In an employment situation, we would condemn this kind of behaviour. So why do we tolerate it here? I think oh, by the way, congratulations to our new councillor, whose name I've forgotten. Oran Asanlu, yes. My apologies. But he made the same point about being respectful towards each other. And, you hear some of the comments tonight, and you can actually start to appreciate why Councillor Bird might be delighted to have been expelled from the Labour Party. So this is a positive amendment. It should apply across party, the principle. So I would really ask everybody to support this, because similar situations may well crop up in the future, and we should recognise the principle that every councillor has the right to determine the policy of this council and sit on a policy committee. Thank you, Mayor.
Right to reply. Proposal of the original motion. Councillor Williamson, you now have the right to reply and may address the council for up to 3 minutes.
I don't intend to do that except to say I'm pleased for you, Joe, if you're delighted to have been expelled from the party. I am pleased that you're delighted. And Pat, I think we've given you a solution. You can give up one of your seats if you want.
Okay. There being no further speakers, I will move to the vote on the amendments. All those in favour?
Some comments have been made about me that I'd like to respond to. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's only personal explanation.
There's no right to respond, Councillor Baird, but there is a right of, if you wish to explain it, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Baird, there isn't a right of response if anything is said about a councillor, so there isn't that ability to do that. All there is the right of personal explanation, which is where someone has said something that is been mistaken by somebody else. So a factual statement, for example, where someone has misheard them and it's a simple correction. It isn't a right of reply or response.
Thanks. I believe there's been a misunderstanding that I would like to make a personal statement about. It's so short.
I'll allow you, Joe, to make a short, very short reply, please. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. If that statement refers to any comments or any other members have made in a personal, then we'll all be up all night replying. It's absolute nonsense, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors have resigned from the Labour Party in recent years and have been allowed to make personal statements too. And that's right, I did call for them to resign as councillors and call a by-election because they resigned from the party they were elected to represent. But I haven't resigned from Labour. I've stuck to the rules of the Labour Party. They changed the rules and applied them retrospectively. The Labour Party expelled me, and Bromborough residents want me to continue as their independent councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. There being no further speakers, I will move to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? Usually half dozen, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think. 11. Right. All those against?
Got them? Yeah.
Okay. And any abstentions, please? 2.
Oh, the irony.
Who's that behind Faxi Mora? Yeah. Okay, the results is votes in favour 11, votes against 46, abstentions 2. That is lost. Right, so we now go to there are no further amendments. Do any councillors wish to speak on the substantive motion? No. Right. Does Councillor Nolan wish to exercise her right to speak as seconder of the original motion? 3 minutes.
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much indeed. Does Councillor Williamson wish to exercise her right of reply as proposer of the original motion for 3 minutes?
Nothing to add, thank you.
We will then move to the vote on the substantive motion. All those in favour, please show.
I think everyone's voting for it, aren't they?
Okay. Hold on. Against? Abstentions? Excellent. Right. So reports and recommendations from Council Committee for consideration. A. Decisions taken since the last Council meeting. 45-minute time limit. No question will exceed 1 minute and no answer will exceed 2 minutes. Members are asked to receive the minutes of committee meetings listed on the summonses, and this is now also the opportunity to ask questions of the committee chairs. Members' attention is drawn to 1 minute in accordance with Part 4, Section 4, Paragraph 9 of the Constitution, in that a decision was taken which was regarded as urgent by the committee as follows. Minute 75, Policy and Resources Committee on the 10th of the 11th, 21, Household Support Fund as projects needed to be funded immediately to ensure full spend of the grant. Yes, sorry, Phil.
Thank you. If I may, members, if I may make a correction, on page 177, the minutes of the Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee, they were corrected at the meeting, but have been printed as originally here. So on page 177, there is the word suggested in respect of the chair, and the word should have read requested. So please note that correction. Thank you, Mayor.
With that correction, now I am not aware of any questions being asked in advance of the meeting, and I do not intend to read through each meeting individually, but will instead refer to this item en bloc. I would therefore ask members that if they do have a question, they make reference to the committee and minute number that the question relates to. Do members have any questions? Stand. Right, can you stand? Yeah. Paul Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is to Councillor Gilchrist, Chair of Constitution and Standards. Page 203 on the report, about the committee system review. We need to review and change the Council Constitution to implement the changes needed identified within the SIPTHA and Ada Burns report. This will be an important piece of work which will require difficult decisions in an expedient way. Given the position that Councillor Gilchrist and the Lib Dems have taken this evening by not accepting the report or endorsing the plan, will Councillor Gilchrist be resigning from his position as Chair of Constitution and Standards?
I think, may I answer, Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, I've committed myself to work with members of all parties to try and learn the lessons of the report that's been submitted to us. And whilst the Decision Review Committee might be regarded as my creation because I work for it, I've taken note of what has been said in the report, but I've also taken note of what members have said about workload. What I've urged members to do was to take part in the questionnaire that was submitted to all members of the Council. That work is in hand, and I'm content to carry on with that work. And I think if members are not satisfied with my work at the committee, working to take account of what everyone feels about the way forward, then they might question whether I should be in that position. But I believe, having raised issues about the report, having listened to the debate, and then, as members will have noted this evening, recognise the situation we're in, My job is to defend the rights of backbenchers, ensure members have the rights and abilities to follow and explain and study all the paperwork before us and to make reasoned decisions on all the issues we face. And that does not mean a snap decision on my position or not. And I'm content to work for the best interests of all members of this council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, congratulations to Councillor Asenlu, is that correct? Sorry, congratulations on your maiden speech. This question, notwithstanding the previous question, is to Councillor Phil Gilchrist, Chair of Constitution and Standards Committee. Committee System Review Minute 17 refers at the Policy and Resources Committee on the 30th of November, where members considered the Council's response to the Ministerial External Assurance Review. You voted against the recommendation 1B, which recommended a view of the committee system to reduce the numbers of committees. And given you voted against this recommendation at PNR, which was you voted against acknowledging and accepting the contents of the reports, developing the recommendations for the implementation, and in particular emphasising the adoption of the recommendations concerning development of financial recovery plan, appointing an independent panel to support the council, moving to a whole council scheme of elections subject to consultation to take effect at the earliest practical opportunity, and review the committee system to reduce the number of committees, how can members have confidence you can lead an effective review of the committee system? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two members have submitted questions, and I would be delighted to have some notice of those, but because matters of principle about how we run our affairs are being raised, I will endeavour to answer them without the notice. We have asked the Local Government Association to look at the way we have worked. Senior members of the council had a meeting with the Local Government Association on Teams last week. We all committed ourselves to work for the best interests of members, and whilst I was certainly not happy with the initial decision that was put to Policy and Resources, Council has now taken a view on how to proceed, and I will always work to the best interests of restoring and building up trust in democracy in this borough to make sure that there is transparency and that the original principles that we had when we set up the committee system are followed as much as possible. It was to involve members, and you've heard my views on whether members' involvement should be widened in getting financial information, and I stand by those. If members of the Constitution and Standards Committee want to discuss these issues and raise them directly at the next meeting, then I'm happy we'll answer those questions there. But I believe this evening we have as a council committed ourselves to work together, and therefore I'm surprised that the two members who've raised these questions, which are obviously thought of beforehand, have not regarded or taken full regard both of my response to the comments that were made at Policy and Resources when I remained dignified, and my constructive response to the debate this evening where I remained dignified. I do wish to thank those members who chose not to say strong words in my direction at various times. I continue to be available to work with members and to bring something like 40 years experience of committee, cabinet and the current new system to bear, so that we come out of this with a thriving democracy that tries to do its best for the residents of Wirral. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't plan to ask a question, but I would like to ask Councillor Phil Gilchrist, under the Chair of Constitution Standards, under Committee System Review, Minute 17. Just before I ask my question, I do find it bit rich from Councillor Gilchrist to say he's had no notice of this when he sat in 3 leaders' meetings one weekend and never mentioned that he would be voting against the recommendations of P&R. But my question is, Councillor Gilchrist alluded to his 40 years on this council, which I respect. I don't think there's anyone in this room that doesn't respect his service to the borough in that time. But my question is, you said your 40 years experience, you haven't seen anything like it. So what is your plan as Chair of Constitution and Standards to conduct this review within a speedy way that comes to the conclusions and meets the recommendations that you voted against?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A speedy review is suggested, and we have a timetable of getting the work completed and in place in order for us to start the new municipal year properly with a system that members support. Currently, Constitution Standards members are looking at the petition scheme to ensure that residents get full time, appropriate time to put petitions to the council and to put petitions to committee with a proper procedure with times set out in a new report that will enable the public to be satisfied they have their say. That's part one. Part two is, as I mentioned, the Local Government Association came in. We met last week. We had a Teams meeting. There were very senior members of other parties and peers, not Lords, not members of the House of Lords, but peer review panel members who gave advice to us as councillors. I'm not going to discuss what was said at private meetings of leaders. That has been touched on in this meeting, but private meetings are private meetings. I did highlight my concerns about the procedures and structures that were being requested at that time. But our job has been to look at the numbers of committees we have, to establish whether they should be reduced in the interest of member workload and officer time, to find a way in which the information coming to committees is concise but also full enough to satisfy members, and to get this done in time for it to be introduced. And I would like to get it done in such a way that debates about which bits of which service fit with committee that have raised concern over recent months are fully addressed, and also to take account of the comments that members have made in the members' survey. I have not seen the results of the members' survey. It was with officers. It will be put to us. We have a meeting of the Governance Working Party from memory on the afternoon of the 14th of December, and time has been set aside after the formal committee meeting for members to meet again. And if members of Governance Working Party wished to raise suggestions as to how we move forward, taking account of what members' desires for openness and transparency are, then they will be taken on board. And I hope members will take assurance that that's the way I've worked since I became the chair and the way in which I intend to carry on as long as the committee members wish me to do so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jason Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations to Councillor Ossendlew on his maiden speech, although I've yet to make mine. I will submit my first question now, and it's to the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, Councillor Cathy Hodson. I refer to minute 18 on page 197 from the meeting on the 27th of September, which states that our auditors were on target to meet the November date for completion of the finances audit, and there were no items so far to draw members' attention to. Does the Chair of the Audit and Risk share my frustration that at such a critical time for the Council's finances, the auditor's report has still not been received, and can she advise when we are likely to receive it?
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. First of all, before I reply to your question, I'd like to issue my congratulations to Councillor Ossendlew. Hope I've pronounced that correctly, on your maiden speech. Very well done. Councillor Walsh, I do share your frustration that the auditor's report is late, especially at this time. Although I would quantify that by saying that in our chair and spokes briefing prior to the Member Audit and Risk Management Committee meeting, Diane Grisdale, our Senior Finance Manager, advised that the external audit was still in progress and asked me as Chair if I wanted to bring a partial report to the ARMC meeting in November. I made the decision that an incomplete report was not satisfactory and that we would wait for the full and final report to be made available. I've been advised that the external audit report is still in progress, with a number of queries to be responded to with regard to financial instruments and a sample creditor. The auditor's findings report is currently in draft format, pending final outstanding items, and it's hopeful that these will be concluded by the end of this week, and the final accounts will be brought to the January 2022 Audit and Risk meeting. Thank you, Jason.
Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Councillor Liz Gray, Chair of the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee. I refer to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of October and the multiple references to Hoylake Beach. We know the beach at Hoylake is rising significantly over time. At present, most of the sand that could reach the promenade is stopped by the sea wall. During Storm Arwen, the green beach protected the promenade, and only as the grass was buried did sand reach and then start to overtop the seawall. If, as beach levels continue to rise, we don't allow sand dunes to form, then we can expect disruptive amounts of sand to reach the promenade several times a year. Furthermore, removing existing vegetation would release sand that is currently held in place by plants. The clean-up costs to the council would be significant, even before you consider potential damage to property. A nature-based solution also avoids the ongoing costs associated with breaking the beach and other interventions. Does the Chair agree with me that a nature-based solution is not just crucial in terms of Wirral's commitment to addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis, it is also important in helping to restore and protect the financial well-being of Wirral Borough Council? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cleary, for your question. I do agree that nature-based solutions are a crucial part of our climate and biodiversity plans, and that they also fit with both Labour Party policy and Conservative Party policy in terms of the current government and the Environment Act. I also agree that full costings of any options put forward for public consultation must be provided if residents are to see the full picture and make informed decisions. This is why I've already asked for full costings to be provided. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stewart-Worthingham.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I indulge Council for 1 second, because it was remiss of me not to congratulate Councillor Gonzalo on his maiden speech. I hope I've got your name right. Welcome to the Council. Thank you.
Right.
Can I just add to that as well? Well done. What a council to make your maiden speech. Well done.
Are you wishing to make a statement, Joe? Not a statement, it's a question. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Chair of Partnerships, arising from the minutes of the meeting held on 9th November, minute 26, where the police were in attendance, and at that meeting I asked how much public money had been spent by Merseyside Police to protect the Military Arms Technology Conference held in the ACC Liverpool in mid-October 2021. I also put in that question as a Freedom of Information request to the police, and their answer was £25,232. Given the scale of the police's operation to protect the arms fair, perhaps partnerships could continue to have some scrutiny over that. And I'm asking you this because, given the vote just taken, I won't be able to be a member of Partnerships Committee going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. Obviously, I'll go back to the PCC and ask for obviously additional information. Thank you for the comments.
We will move to the next agenda item, which is item 6B, joint arrangements and external organisations. No reports or questions have been received in advance of the meeting. Item 7, by-election results, 22nd of July and the 25th of November. Members, we are asked to note the outcomes of the by-elections on the 22nd of July, in that Councillor Daisy Kenny was elected as Councillor for Liscard Ward, and on the 25th of November 2021, in that Councillor Orad Osanalu was elected as Councillor for Oxton Ward. And I'd like to congratulate them both for their achievements. Just before we do finish tonight, I'd like to say I know things have been or can get one way or another. We are coming to a really nice time of the year, hopefully, if everything goes right. I'd like you to join with me for a drink at the bar and something to eat at the end of this meeting. I'd like to wish officers, members, all a very, very happy Christmas and a happy New Year as we move forward. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.